On behalf of the Norwegian Blue Forest Network, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Blue Forest Week 2021. This year's week will be about solutions, and over the next 3 days we will hear about how blue forests can help solve the climate crisis, and we will hear about how we can protect and restore blue forests. My name is Solrun Skjellum. I'm a research director for sustainable societal development at NIVA, the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. I'm also the chair of the board for the Norwegian Blue Forest Network, but the network consists of 3 organizations: GRID-Arendal, the Institute of Marine Research, and the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. Now, our joint vision is that the blue forests are thriving and that they contribute to a healthy planet and people. And in order to do so, our mission is to be the best source of reliable and up-to-date knowledge on Norwegian blue forests. To achieve this, we gather and synthesize research, and we share and communicate the knowledge that we have, and we convene parties that are interested in blue forests, just as we do today. And we are very happy to have speakers from the government, the industry, and the civil society with us here today. And I'm sure some of you out there really know a lot about blue forests, but some of you perhaps don't know quite as much. So before we get started, let's learn a little bit about what blue forests are.
Blue forests are a common name for vegetation in the ocean and tidal zones, such as kelp, rockweed, seagrass, salt marshes, and mangroves. Mangroves are trees and shrubs that grow in saline or brackish waters. They are found along tropical and subtropical coasts around the world. In Norway, kelp forests are the most widely distributed blue forest, followed by rockweed and seagrass. There is limited knowledge on the distribution of salt marshes in Norway, but they are likely found all along the Norwegian coast. Kelp species are large brown seaweeds that grow in rocky habitats in most temperate and polar coastal areas where sunlight is accessible for photosynthesis. Tangle kelp and sugar kelp are by far the most common species in Norway. Like kelp, rockweed is also a brown seaweed. However, rockweed grows in the shallow intertidal zone and is usually smaller than kelp. They are typically visible from the shore. In Norway, all seagrass species belong to the eelgrass family, which grows on the soft seabed in sheltered bays. Salt marshes are coastal wetlands that are flooded and drained by tidal water. They are comprised of a variety of species that tolerate high salinities and appear to be very diverse. Overall, blue forests are marine and coastal habitats that constitute some of the most diverse ecosystems in the world.
So now we know a little bit about what blue forests are, but perhaps some of you have noticed that I have something around me here as well. In this odd-looking column over here, we see something we call a sukkertare in Norwegian, or sugar kelp in English. And on this side, there are actually 2 different types of blue forests. The top organism here is tangle kelp, also known as stortare in Norwegian. And at the bottom there's something reddish. I don't know if you can see that properly, but it's called søl in Norwegian and dulce in English. So why do we care so much about these blue forests? Well, in fact, the entire day tomorrow we will spend answering that question. But for now, I will say that we care about blue forests because they provide a plethora of ecosystem services and they have a huge commercial value. They contribute to several of the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN, and you can see 6 of them here. Blue forests store vast amounts of carbon and they help protect shorelines from erosion. They can improve drinking water, water quality. They are themselves life below water, and they are home to numerous marine species and the nursery ground for several commercial fish species that will eventually end up on our plates. Over the recent years, there's also been sort of a budding industry for kelp cultivation, which is providing income and a plethora of new products. But in many other countries, it's not really about the commercialization. It's about reducing poverty, and it's about food security. Despite their importance, these blue forests are diminishing at an alarming rate, and something needs to be done to save them. So today, we're going to zoom out and take a big picture and take a huge global perspective. And then over the next 2 days, we'll focus a little bit more on Norway and national conditions. In the first session today, we will look at how global cooperation and global agreements can, or perhaps cannot, help support blue forests. And in the second session today, we will dive underwater to get sort of a sneak peek at a global kelp assessment that the network is doing together with the United Nations Environment Programme. Now, we hope and encourage you to participate actively today. So place questions in the chat in Zoom, and apparently there are 2 chats. So use the one that's called Q&A to place your questions. And if you're fed up of putting questions in the chat and want to talk about blue forest, we would like to invite you to an informal blue discussion after the official program today. Now let's get started. In October, several countries that are parties to the Convention of Biological Diversity met to discuss a potential new nature agreement. They met in Kunming in China for a first part of a negotiation for a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And here to tell us all about this is Mr. Gaute Voigt-Hanssen. Gaute works for the Ministry of Climate and Environment here in Norway, and he's the chief negotiator for the Convention on Biological Diversity on behalf of Norway. He's a lawyer by education and holds a degree from the University of Bergen in Norway and a degree from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. So welcome, Gaute. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Solrun. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to talk about the Global Biodiversity Framework, COP15, and the way forward. You can change the slides now. Thank you. Phase 1 of COP15 was held on the 11th to 15th of October in Kunming, China. And phase 2 is planned for the 25th of April to the 8th of May 2022. And phase 2 will be the negotiating part of COP15. There will be a negotiation meeting in Geneva from the 12th to 28th of January, then in Switzerland. And the high-level segment of phase 1 of COP15 adopted the Kunming Declaration, and it gave support for an ambitious and effective global biodiversity framework. And it gives momentum to the second phase of COP15 and stresses that urgent and integrated action is needed for transformative change. Emphasis is put on the relationship between climate and biodiversity. And let me give you one example. In Part 11 of the Kunming Declaration, it says, step up actions to reduce the negative effects of human activities on the ocean to protect marine and coastal biodiversity and strengthen the resilience of marine and coastal ecosystems to climate change. Also, China announced the multi-donor Kunming Fund for biodiversity. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Global Biodiversity Framework, as Solrun also mentioned in the beginning. It is to be a COP decision under the Convention of Biological Diversity, replacing the Aichi targets from 2010, you might say. It will not be legally binding, but it will contain more than 20 goals, targets, and milestones. However, there are also other issues that are to become a part of the framework, such as a decision on responsibility and transparency. It will then be universal in nature, and also address both the terrestrial and the marine environment. It will address the drivers of the biodiversity loss, and the main drivers are land and sea use change, overexploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species, as well as in the indirect drivers, as overpopulation and trade. It is based on the findings and recommendations of the IPBES global assessment from 2019. And the negotiation process with the mandate started in 2018. Next slide, please. It is based on the theory of change, which is to be found as part of the IPBES global assessment. So if you look at the draft global biodiversity framework, which was released in July this year, you will find the theory of change described in that document. Next slide, please. Some of the main issues at CBD COP15 Phase 2 in April, May next year. Climate and biodiversity will be a really important aspect, and nature-based solutions is a hot, let's call it that, topic, and also a matter of divergence, because some parties would like to have that term in the global biodiversity framework, while others do not want it. An increase of at least 15% in the area of connectivity and the integrity of natural ecosystems, also marine ecosystems, of course. At least 20% global protection of land and sea, sustainable use, resource mobilization, and responsibility and transparency, what you might call an implementation mechanism, and the negotiation result, it has to pave the way for transformative change as identified by IPBES. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gaute. Please place your questions in the Q&A if you have any. And while I'm waiting to see if some come in, I'm just going to ask Gaute a few questions myself. Now, this sounds promising and it sounds ambitious. So my first question to you is, are you optimistic about reaching a good agreement in April next year?
Yeah, I think actually, thank you for the question. I think there's actually a sense of urgency now in the global community, not just about biodiversity, but of course also about climate change. And because, I mean, we saw this at COP26, the sense of urgency. And I think this will sort of reflect on biodiversity issues as well, because we do know that climate issues and biodiversity issues are so strongly interlinked that I think it's now almost impossible to separate those issues. And this is of course, if you look at the term nature-based solutions, is very clear, because nature protection is really a part of the climate solution as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, blue forests are some of the perfect example of nature-based solutions, because we know we have nature-based solutions that aren't necessarily good for biodiversity, but these blue forests are good for climate and they're good for biodiversity. So they're a good example. And you mentioned this Article 11 in the Kunming Declaration that talks about stepping up actions to reduce the negative effects of human activities on the ocean to protect marine and coastal biodiversity and strengthen the resilience of marine and coastal ecosystems. This obviously warms the heart of everyone who's interested in blue forests, but what do you think will happen in concrete terms for blue forests given this declaration? It's obviously not an agreement yet, so what do you think will happen in concrete terms for blue forests following this declaration?
Well, for the first, as you rightly point out, that the Kunming Declaration is not something binding as such. It's supposed to give sort of impulses to the negotiations to be finalized in April, May, but it doesn't really mention blue forests either. But I think it's really important that these notches or knobs, if you might call them that, are there so we can hang the forests on those knobs, to use that expression. So I think it will be crucial to have that kind of overarching language so that you can actually relate concrete work to also on nature-based solutions.
Yes, and on those knobs, I mean, I've read the first draft that's out now for the agreement, and one of the things that we've talked about is that it mentions freshwater ecosystems, marine ecosystems, and terrestrial ecosystems, but it doesn't actually specify coastal ecosystems in the same way as the Kunming Declaration does at the moment. And obviously, we're a bit concerned about that. How important do you think it is to provide a clearer knob, as you call it, for coastal ecosystems in the final agreement?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I also noticed that, and I actually think it's a pure omission. I don't think it was the intention from the co-chairs, because this is a co-chair's proposal. It hasn't been negotiated by parties as such as a co-chair's proposal, and I think it's basically an omission. And I think I don't think it will be really difficult to put that knob in where it belongs, firmly on the wall.
That's really good. I can see a question. I'm not seeing it where I'm supposed to be seeing it, so I'm just going to move a little bit. But do you envisage conflict between managing the oceans to ameliorate climate change and managing the oceans to protect biodiversity? How will these deliberations deal with that?
Yes, good question. I think there will, of course, there is a potential for conflict. I mean, there are some hard choices to be made. We all know that, but I think the point is on nature-based solutions, which could be really a good knob to sort of put that work on as a starting point, is to find those solutions that are good for both climate and biodiversity. I think that's really important, and in order to do that, you will need to have an ecosystem approach. So it's basically about finding the right solutions that can benefit both biodiversity and climate, because they all relate to the Sustainable Development Goals, which
Absolutely.
we all have agreed upon.
Thank you so much, Gaute. I'm going to let you go because I know you have a meeting you need to go to. And thank you so much for participating. And we will move on to COP26 in Glasgow. So in a few months, we may have a Paris Agreement for nature. But what's going on with the actual Paris Agreement, Henrik? I'm very thankful that you are here, because you've been working overtime on this agreement in Glasgow and have just come home. So thank you very much for being here, and tell us a little bit about what happened in Glasgow.
Well, thank you. Glasgow worked out. That's the short version. It had a lot of challenges facing it due to the huge workload that we had coming into it because of COVID-19, and also the COVID pandemic itself during the meeting. but it did manage to get decisions on almost every issue, every item, and it also delivered on the main issues, which was finishing the rule book and coming out with a clear message on ambition, both related to mitigation and the 1.5, holding climate change to 1.5 and increasing finance and support. There's been quite a lot of media attention to a weakening of the final main decision on coal, but the main picture is that it actually did deliver quite well on those issues as far as could be expected. I'll go on the. Of course, the main link to climate change is that climate change has a negative impact on the health of ocean ecosystem, and healthy ecosystems dampens the effects of climate change. So there are very strong links there. In the way that the Paris Agreement works on ocean is ambition on ocean will be covered in first and foremost in the work under the 3 pillars. So you have the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, where there was in Glasgow a summing up of a round of enhanced ambitions, deciding it's not enough. So we still need to look at enhanced ambition next year for 2030. NDCs will be oceans will be usually part of economy-wide targets. There aren't really ocean targets within the NDCs. They are economy-wide and covers all the sectors, but they may be an important part of the implementation plans of the NDCs. I'm mentioning this because it has been an issue in many of the sort of the discussions around ocean-based action. Of course, it's also important in adaptation, which was also a clear issue that had a clear strengthening in many tracks, which I don't have time to go into here. Ocean ecosystem is also part of that. For example, restoration of coastal zones, mangroves, and so on. And of course, support to developing countries for climate action, both on mitigation and adaptation. So, and coming into the COP, there had been ocean dialogues, and there was some that was thinking about trying to carve out a space for oceans in the climate change negotiations. It came in the way that under the COP main decision, the COP invited the relevant work programs and all the constituted bodies to consider how to integrate and strengthen ocean-based action in their existing mandates and work plans, and then report on them. And this is a very good solution. Some have been arguing that you should have something separate, but having something separate would probably be weaker than having it integrated into the plans. There's a real danger of it being marginalized if it's something different that doesn't connect to the actual work on mitigation, on adaptation, on transparency, and that's where ocean issues need to be integrated. So we quite like that from Norway's side. And then the chair of one of the main bodies, the SUBSTA, will hold is invited to hold annual dialogue on oceans, and starting from June. So this will be a forum to discuss ocean issues, which then can give input to the work programs and the constituted bodies. So there is a real hook for strengthening ocean work under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. And of course, some of these things are like mangroves is already part of the transparency system, and it's for those having economy-wide targets. It will be it will be not a default, but it will be they will usually include that in their perspectives. But there's a lot when you're talking about kelp forests and so on. It's still very immature. There's no real methodology on it, and so that will need both scientific and work and methodological work in order to get a clear basis for having that into the transparency system. But I think on a more general level, there's a real willingness to engage in ocean-based issues, and on the so-called action agenda, which is another part of the COP where you demonstrate and show solutions on different sectors. Oceans is very is quite present and has a lot of both attraction and following in being a major contributor to solving the issues. I didn't go that much into that because I'm mostly following the negotiations themselves, but there was a lot of initiatives and events at the COP on oceans. So all in all, short version, there is a hook for continued work, and there was also language, sort of preambular language, which gave very clear recognition on the linkages between climate change and biodiversity loss. And we Norway was pushing for this kind of language. We also had contact with Gaute on this. So I think that was quite successful in getting language into the main decisions, recognizing that link at an overarching level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrik. Very happy to hear that you're talking across climate and biodiversity. You're actually describing a lot of ocean-related topics, and perhaps more than I thought would be the case. And then in this Glasgow Pact, there's also reference to marine ecosystems as sinks and the importance of them in addition to the terrestrial sinks. Do you think Glasgow in some way was a shift for ocean in a climate-related manner, although everything is not figured out, but is this a shift in negotiation somehow?
Yeah, I think it's been recognized now as a track that we will address and continue to address. The last COP, it was more like an emerging issue and a bit controversial, and there were these issues about sort of having ocean NDCs and having separate agenda items, and I think this is now settled a bit, so that, which I think will be positive for the impetus and the work being done to promote ocean-based issues under our frameworks. So yes, in that sense, it was a breakthrough, I guess.
Very promising. And I have one question about the forest pledge, because some countries pledged that they would halt the loss of forests by 2030. And the pledge says all types of forests, but it definitely sounds like terrestrial forests when you read the whole pledge. And some people talk of it as rainforest pledge. What is it? Can mangroves be sort of protected, do you think, under this forest pledge? And
yeah, I haven't had time to check with the Forest and Climate Initiative, but mangroves would be in that. That's I think that's very common to have that included. But I agree, it has a terrestrial perspective, so I think it's at least it doesn't seem like the intention was to cover blue forest now.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna take a short walk to read one question here. If ocean issues will be integrated into existing plans, is there any synergies between established agreements for terrestrial forests and what we need for blue forests? That kind of followed up nicely to the forest pledge.
Yeah. Well, I think it might, because there are sort of two tracks, and on the methodological level and the transparency level, and how this fits with the NDCs. There are a lot of common issues between the land sector and oceans. Also in challenges and the difficulties in accounting for changes towards climate change targets. So I think that will, in a way, contribute to these issues being seen more together. And I think as the transparency regime evolves over time, that will also contribute to that. On the more action agenda and the initiatives, it's harder to say, but I think the basic issues are quite similar. And when we go to net zero, go to a global net zero in 2050, we know we will need all the things we can get in order to compensate for the remaining issues. And so I think there will just be increasing focus also on ocean ecosystem and their role in this, and in a way then getting more on par with the terrestrial forests in that respect.
Well, thank you so much, Henrik. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I think we're going to move on. So thank you so much for showing up so close to the COP, and have a wonderful day. Now we're going to do something interesting. We're going to try to link in a lady from London. She's from the Seychelles, but currently located in London. And the Seychelles is one of the countries that have mentioned blue forests in their NDCs. And I can see Angelique there. Wonderful. Good to see you. In fact, I went through the NDC for the Seychelles and I found blue carbon mentioned 15 times in the context of adaptation, but also, exactly like Henrik said, in the sense of achieving net zero through climate or natural solutions in your case. So with us from London, Angelique Pouponneau. She's the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. Now, she has a passion for sustainable use and conservation of oceans, grew up in a fishing district, and she's a master of laws. Law of the sea and natural resources are her specializations, but she has also been trained as a UN climate negotiator. So, Angelique, let's hear about the Seychelles and a little bit about your sort of take on what happened during these COPs.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. So a little bit about what happened in the Seychelles, and thank you for looking up our NDC. And indeed, one way that we saw ourselves increasing our ambition as a small island developing state, and as you know, or as many people know, small island developing states, when it comes to carbon emissions, we're quite tiny in the grand scheme of things, but we still wanted to increase our ambition, both looking at mitigation and adaptation. So blue carbon seemed fitting to do that. So we, in partnership with others, such as the Pew Trust, the Nature Conservancy, University of Oxford, University of Seychelles, we wanted to support the government of Seychelles to actually include blue carbon within our nationally determined contributions. And we ideally, before COVID, we would have had the numbers in our inventories and everything. But because we were slowed down on the science side, what we have done is recognized the importance of blue carbon ecosystems. And here we're particularly focused on seagrass, or at least what the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust was focused on. And the reason for that is quite simple. Whilst other countries have a lot of scale as it relates to mangroves, Seychelles does have mangroves, but it's not at the same scale. So we focused on our strength, which is seagrass. And we committed to undertaking a mapping of the entire exclusive economic zone for seagrass meadows. And by the way, this would be remote sensing as well as on-ground validation, where we would then look to use the IPCC methodology to be able to ascertain how much carbon is being stored. So this is a process that we're undertaking. And then, of course, very important to that is we wanted to ensure that in placing that in our NDC, we're also building the capacity of the local population to be able to maintain this process, right? To be able to continue the monitoring of seagrass meadows, to be able to update our carbon inventories once you put it in, continue to update the blue carbon inventory, and including blue carbon. We then went to COP to showcase the work that we've done. And really show how a small island developing state could undertake this work. One, of course, bearing in mind that, partners are, very important. And then that we committed, I think it was sometime in Marrakesh, the declarations, the Because of Our Ocean declarations, we were part of the Friends of the Ocean, really saying that the next round of NDCs are going to be blue NDCs. And I've seen the latest assessments that are showing that a lot more countries have now included ocean and blue carbon ecosystems within their nationally determined contribution. So that's really exciting. But in addition to sort of showcasing and that kind of work, we were also part of negotiations and understanding whether blue carbon would have a space within the Article 6 negotiations. And we saw that we've got one decision on non-market approaches, which is looking at, I'm just going to read the text here. So examples of potential additional focus areas of non-market approaches that may be facilitated under the framework, including social inclusivity, financial policies and measures, circular economy, blue carbon, just transition and the workforce adaptation benefit mechanism, and existing relevant non-market approaches that may be facilitated under the framework in the potential addition focus areas that are in accordance with the provisions referred to. And this is with relations to non-market approaches. So this was, this was really exciting. And we welcome that there's, specific blue carbon language in 6.8, the non-market approaches, as it is increasingly recognized for its climate mitigation. Just to note, one of the reasons that Seychelles placed our blue carbon component mostly in adaptation was because we were not ready yet with the science to be able to place it in the inventory, and that was a delay. If the delays hadn't happened, they would feature in both. But also as a developing country, really showing the importance of adaptation to us, right? Saying that as our blue forests, they're not only important for their climate functions, but also fisheries and biodiversity. So we wanted that to be very much recognized. And just some more thinking around this specific language on blue carbon, whilst we think it's a good thing, there are still, and it provides an opportunity to secure finance through these mechanisms other than markets. There still needs to be more rules and clearer rules to be able to understand how it will actually be operationalized. So we are keen to continue working with the international community to understand how all of this will actually be realized in sort of real terms. But that's pretty much what we've been doing in the Seychelles, and reflections on COP. It was great to hear from a colleague from Norway about his views of the COP26. But as a small island, we co-sponsored the resolution last COP25 to have ocean included. We're very exciting that now it's no longer this contentious issue where we're back, at square one, trying to persuade people that this needs to be part of the conversation. And we're also really happy that we're breaking silos. We're not saying ocean belongs here, climate belongs here, but we're really breaking those silos that are actually quite unhelpful in addressing these global pressing challenges. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Angelique. I'm going to ask you two questions, if you can answer them briefly, please. You talked about it not being so easy to get the job done in terms of emission reductions. Could you say a little bit about what kind of science you're missing to do what you wanted to do? And secondly, what do you wish the global community would do for blue forests going forward?
Sure. So missing science. So whilst we'll get a validated map, there's still a lot to be learned about the rate of sequestration, seasonality when it comes to seagrass, and permanence. So those are three key additional research pieces required. In terms of what I would like the global community to continue doing, I think we need thought leadership, and we need people thinking about these issues, working together to develop clearer rules, because that will really assist us to strengthen that ecosystem service that the seagrass of Seychelles and the seagrass meadows everywhere else is providing to the globe. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angelique, and have a safe time in London. And right now, thank you all for being our guests, and we're going to take a 1-minute break. So get up from your chairs, raise your hands, move around a little bit, and we'll see you in 1 minute's time. Welcome back, everyone. This part is now called a call to action for blue forests. How can Norway contribute internationally? And I want to give a special welcome to Harald Hansen from WWF, Stephen Lutz from GRID-Arendal, and Gabriella Kossmann from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. What's going to happen now is they're going to have 2 minutes each to say a little bit about blue forests from their viewpoint. And meanwhile, you can post some questions. And we're going to kick off with Harald. And remember, it's 2 minutes for each of you. And Harald, he's the Senior Advisor on Sustainable Oceans at WWF. But he used to work for the ministry. He worked for the Ministry for Climate and Environment, as well as the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And he has worked with ocean management plans, fisheries, the Ocean Panel, and a little bit with blue forests as well. And currently, he manages the NORAD programs on illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in some Asian waters. So, Harald, please tell us a little bit about blue forests from your standpoint.
Thank you. Well, it was very interesting to listen to these presentations we've had, because finally we see how the ocean is being more and more present in global discussions on climate change and biodiversity. There's been several important processes in the prior years that have helped with this. We've seen the IPCC special report on the ocean cryosphere. We've seen the Ocean Panel that has really elevated this under Norwegian leadership. And we start to recognize that the ocean is not only important for SDG or Sustainable Development Goal 14 on oceans, but also for Sustainable Development Goals and fighting hunger, for jobs creation, for energy, and much more. A natural infrastructure and nature-based solution is at the center of this. Blue forest ecosystems are the perfect example, as they have a critical role in mitigation, adaptation, and resilience building from the carbon sequestered in blue forest habitats, like mangroves and seagrass beds and kelp forest, and for protecting against storms and other climate change impacts. And if managed effectively, the ocean can help keep our climate in balance, feed a growing population, support economic development and protect habitats and treasured wildlife. But only a healthy ocean can provide these essential services. We need to protect, maintain, and restore the ocean's natural capital to unlock the full value of the goods and services it provides, which benefits all life on planet Earth. WWF, which I'm working with now, has had several projects on blue forests and was part of founding the Global Mangrove Alliance. We believe blue forests must be a high priority in what is both the UN Decade of Ocean Science and the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. WWF proposes 4 principles to guide integrated ocean and climate action to strengthen the mitigation, adaptation, and resilience potential of marine and coastal ecosystem and everything and everyone that depends on them. That is to raise ambitions and urgently deliver stronger and sustained mitigation adaptation actions, make nature a key part of the solution, put people at the center, and join up climate and ocean finance agendas. Thank you, Solrun.
Thank you so much. Well done. We're going to move on. This is like a speed date on blue forests. So the next one is Stephen Lutz. He's a blue carbon lead at GRID-Arendal. And that means that he works to advance the concept of blue carbon through national demonstrations as well as in international treaties. And he has a fair bit of experience with international climate negotiations. And he's worked on several international projects. For example, the Abu Dhabi Blue Carbon Demonstration Project, as well as the Global Environment Facilities Blue Forest Project. So go ahead, Stephen. What's your take on blue forests?
Thank you very much, Solrun and Harald. You really hit all those bases. So I'll just say a little bit about blue forests and the Blue Forest Project that GRID-Arendal has implemented on behalf of the United Nations Environment Programme. This is a project that's run for the past 5 years, and it's looked at how we can harness this value of blue carbon and blue forests, these other ecosystem benefits, to achieve sustainable goals and sustainable outcomes for the climate and also for coastal communities around the globe. And through this project, we've been able to showcase blue carbon on the voluntary carbon market and showcase how you can recognize these ecosystem benefits like mangrove crab farming to support sustainable communities. And I think it's vitally important to recognize that this is not just blue carbon, but the reason why we're calling it blue forest is because of these other vital ecosystem benefits that are sometimes so much more important to these communities. So just from the sort of carbon point of view, and I'm going to try to make sure I don't speak too long, through the voluntary carbon market, we were able to set up projects, community-based projects in Kenya and Madagascar. And the carbon finance from the voluntary carbon market, the profit is going to support these communities to not just do reforestation and afforestation projects, but also to build freshwater wells, buy school books for children, and buy hospital equipment. However, even though we've had these great strides on the voluntary carbon market, we still only have a few thousand hectares of viable blue carbon projects, coastal blue carbon projects on the voluntary carbon market. And there is a lot of work to do. I see and I hear that there's we've been contacted by carbon traders all the time, and they want blue carbon projects. There is the demand for blue carbon projects vastly outweighs the supply, and I think I'll sort of just leave it there to say that we're poised in a gold rush. There's a lot of opportunities, but there's also potentially a lot of risks associated with setting up these projects. I'd love to share more with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And then our last panelist, Gabriella Kossmann. Gabriella is a senior advisor in NORAD's ocean section. She has 10 years of experience from ocean-related development aid, including fisheries, aquaculture, shipping, and marine protection through international conventions and agreements. And over the past years, she's been part of the Secretariat for the Ocean for Development, which is a fairly new development program in Norway. Gabriella, what's your take on blue forests?
Thank you, Solrun, and hello to everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this session. I'm very happy to be here. So blue forests are providers of so many crucial services for humanity. We've heard a lot about them already, including absorbing huge amounts of CO2. Mangrove forest and other coastal ecosystems are the ultimate nature-based solutions for both climate change mitigation and adaptation. Globally, hundreds of millions of coastal people rely on blue forests such as mangroves for food security, fuel, and livelihoods. Mangrove fisheries, for example, particularly high-value species such as shrimp and crabs, are a lifeline for families and economies and underpin food security for entire communities. The drivers of poverty and loss of blue forests, such as mangroves, are interconnected and complex. This makes it so important to have a holistic and integrated approach when working on these issues. The work needs to be based on inclusive, transparent, and just processes where communities are part of the dialogue when planning an intervention together with government authorities and other stakeholders. And this is to ensure that a planned intervention does not come at the expense of other relevant sustainability goals. In the political platform for the new government, the area of international development cooperation, there are emphases on two areas, among others, but it's food security and climate change adaptation. I think that coastal ecosystem areas and blue forests will be important when pursuing these two prioritized working areas moving forward in Norwegian development cooperation. Thank you, Solrun.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. I'm going to kick off with a few questions myself. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but please go ahead and add them. And I'm going to start with a question that goes to Harald and Stephen. You both come from organizations that have worked quite extensively with blue forests internationally. And if you want to sort of sum up what the needs of developing countries are in terms of blue forests and what the international community can do to help them, what would you say? I'm going to start with you, Harald.
Thank you, Solrun. It's a very good question, and it's not an easy answer to it. But I think a lot, both for developing countries and developed countries such as Norway, is the same, that we need a coordinated, transparent approach to marine carbon counting and research methodologies, because we need to know how to measure and to understand the storage of carbon. So that's one part of it. But then it's also very important to recognize the importance of marine carbon and blue forests, and how it needs urgent and protection, and how climate and biodiversity policies have to be interlinked with also poverty alleviation and protecting people. Because I think a lot of what is needed, as Stephen was talking about, is how also communities have to be able to live from it, so that you have to be able to have economic activities and that it's delivering things for local communities. I guess, Stephen, you've worked much more with this than me, so you probably have some very good answers here.
That's all
But
right.
I think that's your cue, Stephen.
That's my cue. Okay, so I give this a wee bit of thought, and essentially capacity enhancement is definitely something, local capacity and regional capacity for developing countries, not just in the carbon science, but also in the implementation of projects. So capacity to understand how to measure and account for these ecosystems, to evidence their additionality, okay? And how do you sort of put a blue carbon project together? As Harald says, it's not just the carbon, but also sort of the nature-based blue forest economy side of things. We could also look at making sure or ensuring socially just outcomes for blue forests projects or blue carbon projects, because I believe that some of the terrestrial carbon has been, and forestry projects has been criticized with limiting indigenous access to forests. Well, a lot more people live on the coasts than in terrestrial forests. So we have that danger there, but also use of potentially indigenous knowledge to support our sort of blue forests and blue carbon approaches. And then policy integration. So there's been a wealth of experience, not just from the UAE or for the Blue Forest Project, on how to incorporate the value of blue carbon and blue forests into existing policy frameworks. And then not just the existing policy frameworks like your coastal zone management or your mangrove management plan that now can include these sort of values, but also, as our previous speakers identified, and Angelique, the NDCs. So strengthen and more ambitious NDCs, realistic NDC goals. So yes, you have a lot of countries now that are making NDC pledges related to blue carbon and blue forests. However, do they have the capacity to realistically implement those? And I think there is definitely a need there. I could go on, so I'll just be quiet.
Thank you so much. Now, Stephen, you've actually talked a lot about financing mechanisms like credit and market mechanisms. And I want to ask all of you a question on about how we can secure blue climate financing. I mean, the Glasgow Climate Pact urges developed countries to at least double their collective provisions to climate finance for adaptation up to 2025. But there is a terrestrial focus in many of these pledges, and we heard that ocean is coming in. And we saw that some countries like the UK and Norway pledged money to ProBlue, which is one of the World Bank's fund for mangroves, etc. But how can we secure blue climate financing? Seychelles have started with blue bonds. Is this the way forward? I'm going to go very quick because we're running out of time. So Stephen, you have a couple of seconds to answer that.
Okay, so a quick one is to just immediately say that one thing that countries may need is, developing countries especially, is how do they access these funds, okay? Yes, there's a number of things that are occurring like debt relief, blue bonds, maybe the Green Climate Fund or the Global Environment Facility, but some of these funds may be restrictive as far as capacity for developing countries to achieve the finance to get to a sustainable NDC. So that's where the finance connection immediately comes from. But yes, there is a number of these sort of blue bonds and blue funds that are sort of being put together. So we need to really seriously look at that and say, oh, how are these accessible and how can we facilitate developing countries to access them? Just to be quick.
Thank you. Gabriella, do you want to say something on this one?
Yes, just very short, 2 comments. The one that you mentioned, ProBlue, this is a multi-donor trust fund that we work with together with 11 other donors. And in a Norwegian, in an official development assistance context, it's really important that we co-finance and that we build up funds that have actually the financial muscles to go in, and that the developing countries are very aware of the access of finance that they can tap into. I would say, the ProBlue multi-donor trust fund, it's now, I think, over 300 million Norwegian crowns since 2018 that has gone into that trust fund. It's from marine litter program, it's from fish for development, oceans for development, different kinds of programs. My second point, and the most important, is that public funds are not enough. So I think, a message to everybody is that we need to think smarter around partnership. We need to really figure out how we can scale up, but to do that in an inclusive and a sustainable manner. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabriella. I'm not going to give you an opportunity to answer this, Harald. I'm instead going to give you a different question, because Gabriella said that there are some thoughts about blue forests going on in Norway at the moment, but they're waiting for signals from the new government. So if you were to advise NORAD on how they should package a blue forest effort, what would you say, Harald?
It's a good question. Well, I would say...
There's no sound on him, is there?
Are you not hearing me? Yeah, you're hearing me. Okay, good. So I think what's important is to see the multiple benefits of blue forests in this, and see the need for getting in finance for small scale businesses that have business plans that are good for people and environment, and to even though I wasn't asked the former question, to make sure that in all of these issues that the sustainable blue economy finance principles are being used. Which are very good. But I think getting in larger projects focusing on restoring blue carbon and blue forest ecosystems, and focusing on all the multiple benefits, not only climate, not only biodiversity, not only the poverty alleviation, but seeing them all as one, is where we can really get the big benefits from blue forest work. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Harald, and thank you to Gabriella and Stephen as well. We're going to let you go now and wrap up this session. Thank you to the speakers and the panelists, and thank you all for following us. I think we can sort of sum it up that blue forests are important and they are diminishing at an alarming rate, but they are becoming more and more recognized as important in international policies.